move on now for a little change of pace. I'd like to invite up Tony Daunt with the Michigan Freedom Fund, who opposes the bill, wishes to speak.
Hello, I just put a mint in my mouth, so I'm going to go ahead and spit that out here real quickly. Thought it'd be a little bit longer before you brought up the turd in the punch bowl. So, as you mentioned, thank you for having me for the opportunity to speak. My name's Tony Daunt. I'm the executive director of the Michigan Freedom Fund. We are a conservative advocacy organization, and we strongly believe in letting job creators and families keep more of their money. We believe that they'll spend it more wisely than any government entity could, and therefore believe in lower taxes, less regulation, and that helps with job creation, job retention. All that being said, we are strongly opposed to this legislation. We were strongly opposed to this legislation in 2017 in its first iteration, and we are even more strongly opposed to this because it removes the only safeguards that were in place from 2 years ago of the cap on how much can be spent and the sunset to examine whether or not it's doing things that its supporters claim that it is. Michigan has experienced a remarkable comeback over the last 8 years. There's no question about that. Fiscal discipline, broad-based tax reform for job creators, focus on paying down long-term debt, easing of regulatory burdens, all of those things have done great work to get us to where we are. And I have no doubt that the supporters of this legislation, some of them part of those votes, part of that decision making, that they view this as a way to continue that. But good intentions is not a predictor of good results, and believe that this type of legislation is simply it's stealing. It's taking future revenues and giving them to large corporations at the expense of local taxpayers. For instance, we've spent the last 10, 12 months, however long it is, debating the issue of a gas tax increase and how much people should pay additional at the pump to fix our roads, to fix our infrastructure. And in the same breath, while that issue's still out there, we're talking about programs like this that promise to forego hundreds of millions of dollars in its current form of 492, possibly an unlimited amount of money to corporations in the form of income tax capture from the people working the jobs, from the people who will be most impacted by a raise in the gas tax. And I can assure you that there's never been the CEO of Pfizer or FCA isn't worried about paying an extra $10 or $15 each fill up at the pump, but the individual whose income taxes are being captured certainly is. And I think it's a fundamental unfairness. And again, this is somebody who believes in letting businesses keep more of their resources to invest, to grow, to hire more people, letting taxpayers keep more of their money. But if we're going to do that, we should have a discussion about it being broad-based, that it applies to everybody. It's not just a select few who are either well-connected, to a select few that have the resources to go through the application process of a program like this. And I think it's mistaken, and I think, and I would urge each of you to oppose this legislation.
Well, thank you, and I do appreciate the conversation we had in our office as well. So I'm not unfamiliar with your position. I just don't agree with it. But and I don't think it's a surprise.
The feeling's mutual, yeah.
And for the record, the committee doesn't see you as the turd in the punch bowl.
See, and that's why I have trouble agreeing with these guys sometimes.
Yeah, the consensus of the committee is that you're not the turd in the punch bowl. There is some, I get confused a little bit by the position of the Freedom Fund as you just described it, saying that people should be able to keep more of their own money. We think that's from our side, I think that's a conservative idea, and that's part of what this does is allows corporations who earn these dollars and hire these people, and they spend a lot of money. I think we heard $75 billion in gross payroll. the average taxpayer isn't going to feel anything from this, and your assumption is that we've already gotten the gas tax passed and it's ready to roll. That's not true. That's not the case, and so if it's your concern that that government isn't getting enough money, from its from its residents and from its businesses, a broad-based tax cut then is counterintuitive to fixing the roads as well. And in no way, and even in our discussion in my office, does lowering the tax rate, it gives people more money in their pocket and gives them a little bit more buying power. But if we go from 425 to, let's say, to 3.9 where it was before, how does that attract new talent?
Well, and I think that I don't think you're intentionally mischaracterizing the issue of me saying the government needs more money. I think our position is very clear that the government traditionally has more than enough money. It's an issue of how it spends it and whether it spends it wisely. The issue is kind of the irony in going to and having this lengthy debate about a gas tax increase, whether that's a 5 cent, 10 cent, 45 cent. Now I've heard 80 cents apparently is in play from the transportation director at a summit recently. That type of discussion where those of us who go pay for the pump, pay for those taxes, we're going to pay extra for that. There's no question that this debate is happening about how we're going to pay for infrastructure updates. And then we're going to turn around and say, but these new companies,
yeah,
or these companies that already exist and have got $7 million to move 15 miles, they're going to get these tax incentives, and they're going to get these breaks based on a hope and a promise.
But I need to move on, but you're conflating these issues, and we can talk about this, offline, and we'll banter back and forth probably in editorials. But as you heard, with the Grand Rapids case, that company in Caledonia outgrew its facility. They would have moved regardless, and that the 400 new jobs had nothing to do with them outgrowing their other. And these 400 new jobs are what's at stake. Well, not existing dollars, and so this is and then talking about gas tax only inflames and gins up, I suppose, the supporters of your organization, but it's really not relevant to this conversation. This bill it does stand on its own.
I strongly disagree that these are not related issues, because we're looking at foregoing hundreds of millions of dollars, again, potentially unlimited hundreds of millions of dollars in tax revenue, in future tax revenue, while we are simultaneously asking individuals or talking about asking individuals to pay more at the pump. And I don't think that is conflating issues. I think it's tax revenue. It's money that comes into the government coffers that can be spent somewhere. And so if we want to talk about where that revenue is coming from, number one, let's stop giving out handouts to select companies. Again, if we want to have a discussion about tax reform that applies to everybody equally, that doesn't apply to FCA, and then the poster boy for the upcoming iteration is Mahindra, who's a competitor of FCA, who is being sued by FCA for various copyright infringement, that I think calls into question the entire foolishness of these types of proposals.
Okay, I appreciate your testimony.